All right, now we can use shifts in supply and demand to explain a price change in pretty much any good on the market, and they all follow these same rules. So in this example, I pretty much always start out equilibrium. So supply 1 and demand intersect right here. I'll call that point A. And so point A, the market was in equilibrium at price 1 and quantity 1, okay? Then something happened. So Apple entered the market. So the number, this is one of the determinants of demand, right? Number of sellers or number of firms in the market. So Apple, so now we've got more people producing smartwatches, so the supply increases to the right. So demand hasn't changed, we just had a supply shifter. So we now have supply 2 and demand, and they intersect right here at point B. So this is the new equilibrium point. And at this point, the price is now P2. So we see the price went down and the equilibrium quantity went up. So we have a new equilibrium, new price and quantity, and so this increase in supply will bring the price down and the quantity up, which is really a win-win for consumers, right? More people have smartwatches and the price is lower. So that's so everybody's actually happy in this one. More firms are making money, blah blah blah. All right, in this one, again, we start out, here's supply, and this is a shift in demand. So we start out at demand 1, so we're in equilibrium right here at point A, price 1, and quantity 1. Now what happens is income increases, and so that's one of the demand shifters. And so we can see that an increase in income, if we assume this is a normal good, an increase in income will increase demand. So demand shifts to the right. Here's my new demand curve. Here's my new equilibrium point at point B. And so now the price is here. So we can see the price went up and the quantity went up as well. So we see the same increase in quantity, but now we see an increase in price instead of a decrease in price because a change in demand was what was driving this one. And so that will cause the price to go up. So even when I'm answering a multiple choice question, for example, on the homework or especially on an exam, and it'll describe something like this that happened. So it might just say, okay, income goes up, what happens to price and quantity? So you can memorize it, and I have a chart here, but I will pretty much always draw it. And so I always start, and so I say, okay, we start in equilibrium, I have this, and now something happens, and so on the chart I draw. And so you have to say, all right, this income, that's one of the determinants of demand, so I'm going to look on the demand side, that's going to increase it. Or in this one you say, okay, a new firm enters the market, that's going to be on the supply side, so then I draw that. You can do it in a chart as well. And so this is a chart in your book, and we're going to finish this chart off in a minute. But what we've got here is, okay, we're always going to kind of start out here in equilibrium, supply, demand, like that. And so if nothing changes, supply doesn't change, demand doesn't change, then neither the price or the quantity does. But in each of these other ones, so let's say supply doesn't move, but demand shifts to the right. So that's an increase in demand. And so then what we see, here's supply, here's demand. I started out at price 1 and quantity 1, and then demand shifts to the right. So here's demand 2, and I go up here. So I see a price increase, and here's my new quantity, and I see a quantity increase. So every time you see this situation where supply doesn't change, but demand does, you're going to see an increase in price and an increase in quantity. If we do it this way, here's demand, here's supply, I start out at price 1 and quantity 1, and the supply curve shifts to the left, a decrease. I'm sorry, the demand curve, supply is unchanged, demand shifts to the left, so I go over here, demand 2. Here's my new equilibrium point, so I can see that the price decreases, and here's my new quantity. I can see quantity decreases as well. So every time supply doesn't move and demand shifts to the left, I will see a decrease in the price and a decrease in the quantity. I can do the same thing with supply. And so in this case, I'm saying demand is unchanged and supply shifts to the right. So I start out demand and supply. Here's my starting price, and here's my starting quantity. and supply shifts to the right. So it goes like this. Supply 2 over here. Here's my new equilibrium point. So I can see that the price went down and the quantity went up. Price decreases, quantity increases. So every time you see a situation where demand doesn't shift but supply shifts to the right, you should see an increase in the price, or increase in the quantity, decrease in the price. Same thing over here. Supply, demand. I start out at price 1 and quantity 1, and then demand is unchanged, supply shifts to the left. So supply shifts to the left, this way. Here's my new equilibrium point, so I can see that the price goes up and the quantity goes down. So that makes the consumer sad, right? There's less of it and the price is higher. So that's what we see with toilet paper in a pandemic. So this is showing us when just either the supply or the demand shifts. So one thing shifts, the other thing stays the same. So those are actually kind of the easier ones because only one thing is changing, and so it will always be these. So you don't have to draw the graph. You could kind of memorize it off the chart, but I kind of like drawing the graph. But sometimes we see things. Well, let's do an example of that. So from 2006 to 2013, the price of Blu-ray players fell from $800 to about $95, while the number of Blu-ray players traded increased dramatically. What best explains this? So what we see is a drop in price and an increase in the quantity. So if we go back here, where are we going to see a decrease in price and an increase in quantity? And so you can check these for situations like that, and we see it right here. So we see supply curve shifting to the left, demand curve not moving. So that is an increase in supply. That's the only thing that can cause this situation right here, where we see a drop in the price and an increase in the quantity. Can you show this on a demand curve? Well, sure we can. So here's my quantity, here's my price, here's 0, right? And so I started out, and I can see there's a really big drop in the price, big drop. So I started probably something like this. Here's the demand for Blu-ray players, and the supply was probably back here, supply 1. And so I was selling, they were selling for $800, and I don't know, I'll just make up a quantity here, 100 million, whatever. And so for the price to drop from 800 to 95, we probably saw, a really big shift in supply, like this, okay? And so now the price is down here to 95, it could have been even bigger than that, and now I'm selling, 700, something like that. So that's what that would look like on a graph, and we would see, since it's a big change in the price, we would see a really big shift in the quantity. Okay, now, more than likely though, over time, both supply and demand will shift. Things are happening on both ends of the spectrum, and so we would see supply and demand shift. So in this example, it says, okay, what if we have the supply, so we have new firms entering the market, so that's the supply shifting to the right, and at the same time income increases, so the demand would be shifting to the right, all right? So I could do it like this, all right? Here's the supply, 1, here's the demand, 1. I start out at this price and this quantity, quantity 1. And so now what happens is the supply shifts to the right, and at the same time, demand shifts to the right, like this. Demand 2, S2. And so here's my new equilibrium point. So I end up at essentially the same price, but at a higher quantity. Now, the thing is, it might not have been the exact same thing. So what we have in this one, we have the supply, the shift in supply from S1 to S2 would normally bring the price down, but the shift in demand would bring the price up. So these two have essentially canceled each other out. However, they both lead to an increase in the quantity, so that's what we see here. But this is because I drew them about the same. The shift in supply and the shift in demand were essentially about the same amount. It might not be that way. You might have something like this, where you have a big shift in demand and a little shift in supply. And so we said, okay, both of these things, an increase in supply and an increase in demand, cause the quantity to go up. But these two things work in opposite directions, right? Now in this one, just looking at the graph, you can see a little shift in supply and a big shift in demand, which means this one's going to win, okay? So the increase in supply would normally bring the price down, so that's going to mitigate this a little bit, but overall the increase in demand is bigger. So we see the price going up and the quantity going up. So when we just gave it this way, you didn't know what they were. I drew them about the same. You could have drawn it like this, with a big increase in demand and a little increase in supply, and so I would have said what's going to happen is the price is going to stay the same and the quantity is going to increase. And you said, no, I drew it and I see an increase in the price and an increase in the quantity. And then somebody else might have drawn it like this, with a little increase in supply and a big increase in demand, in which case the supply is going to win out, and so we see the price going down. And so all three of those are correct. If I didn't give you the amounts and I just said this, all three of those are correct. So it depends which one. So when two things are going to have opposite impacts, it depends which one's bigger, and the bigger one is going to kind of win out over there. So we don't really know. Without, if they gave you numbers, you would. If you see it on a graph, you can, but if they just give it to you in words, we're not really sure. And you will see some of those in some of the multiple choice problems. So these first ones are what we already did, all right? Now, let's say the supply curve shifts to the right and demand curve shifts to the right, which is what we just saw. No matter what, we know that the quantity is going to increase. But the price might go up, might go down, or might stay the same. It really depends which shift is bigger. If they're the same, the price isn't going to change. If the increase in demand is bigger, the price is going to increase. If the increase in supply is bigger, the price is going to decrease. So in each of these situations, one thing is guaranteed, okay? One thing is guaranteed, and the other one you don't know unless you see it on a graph, because it depends which one is bigger. So I always recommend on all of these drawing a graph to do it. Most of the time, if they don't tell me, I shift them the same. But if they told you one was bigger, then you could do it. So if you see it on a graph, you can definitely answer the question. But if they just give it to you in words without a graph, then your answer is, for example, for this one, you would say, okay, well, the quantity will definitely increase. I cannot determine what happens with the price with the information here. So that's kind of our answer to that one. Suppose, so again, the movement along the curve, and sometimes this is kind of a common error here. So suppose we see an increase in supply. We know that the quantity is going to increase, the price is going to decrease. It's tempting to say that, okay, well, if the price decreases, that will increase demand. A lot of people say that. If the price goes down, that will increase the demand. That is incorrect, okay? Why? Because a change in price doesn't increase in demand. A change in price changes the quantity demanded. It's a movement along that curve. That's back to that slide where I had the big stars over there. That's really important. So if the shift in supply causes the price to decrease, the quantity demanded will increase, but that's not one of the demand shifters, so that we can't say that there's going to be an increase in demand. We can say that there will be an increase in the quantity demanded, right, at a given price. So that's kind of important to remember there. If nothing happened on one of those demand shifters, then the demand didn't change, and we just moved to a different quantity there. So don't fall for that trap when you do that. So that's the basics of it. It does take a lot of practice to get this. So use the study plan, do lots and lots and lots of graph practice, and this will start to flow a bit faster for you.